Hey everyone, today we are going to look at switching up just a few elements to create a drastically different card. And we're going to be looking at some embossing powder techniques that I bet you haven't tried before. Today, let's stretch your card making stash to create drastically different cards with the same stuff. Okay, so make sure you hit the like and subscribe on this video. Today we're going to be looking at two different trios from Wow Embossing Powder. Now, if you do not swatch your embossing powders, look at this difference. I think you're missing out on ways you can use them. The side to the left is just on white paper and the side to the right is on black. Look at how different those colors look. So I swatched these three and we're going to work on this card, and I'm going to color my cards differently. I'm going to show you two different techniques to create drastically different cards with these colors. So right here, I swatched with black on the left on this one, and this one also, actually, I think it's on the other side, but it really, you can't tell much a difference with this trio. So some trios, it's a drastic difference, and some it's not. So with this one, we're going to use it a different way to create this card, and I'm going to show you both of those techniques. We're going to start with plain white paper for the first one, and then we're going to add all kinds of color and dimension. We're using this 3D embossing folder that has all these balloons. I believe it's called Bunch of Balloons by Altenew. So I loved this trio of blues and greens, and I thought this would make the perfect masculine card. Even though this has kind of a more feminine, it's got the hearts, balloons, and things like that. I thought if I do the right colors here, I can really create an awesome masculine birthday card. So what I decided to do, since the color is drastically different on the black with those trios, I decided that I was going to loosely color this embossing folder so that you would be able to tell through that embossing powder that these balloons had like a light and a dark side. So I'm going to use one dark green and one very light green. This is not something I wouldn't normally color this way. If this was just going to be a coloring card, I would add more blending in there, but you don't have to be overly cautious with this because you're going to cover it with embossing powder. So see how different those greens are? Just think, looking through embossing powder, you're going to see that difference. So you don't have to be too crazy with it. I started to kind of do a little shading, and I really didn't even need to do that. I just need to fill it in with colors so that it looks different under the embossing folder. And I'm not going to make you watch all of this, but I will show you the blue colors that I used as well, so you'll have those. And I just kind of did every other of these balloons. So just to show you that I'm really not being super careful with this, is here's the darkest blue that I'm using. And I probably could have even gone lighter on the blue that I used. I felt like the green with that drastic color difference showed up even better than the blue. So I could have taken like a really light blue to this and it would be fine. But I also really love how this card turned out. So no complaints, but just if you're thinking about doing it, having that drastic difference, it makes it more visible underneath that embossing folder. Or not that embossing folder, that embossing powder. Okay, so here's how that panel is looking. Like I said, it's kind of messy coloring, so if don't feel confident in your coloring, this is an easy thing to do. This could be done with other things. You could do this with something like colored pencils. You could do it with a different brand of marker. You could possibly even do it with watercolor. So I'm going all the way to the edges because I want to use the entire panel, but you could do this a lot faster if for some reason you were just going to do like a portion of your card in it. Just do a portion of the coloring and don't waste the rest. I end up using the top part of this, and that's why I don't color those bottom two, partly because I knew that I wanted this to be a masculine card, and that's two more hearts. So I decided that I would just use the top part and could make a card from that. Now I'm using anti-static powder because here's where we get into embossing. So you may wonder how we're going to get embossing on all of this. You could rub your ink pad over the raised area, but I wanted a thicker coat, and so I'm going to use this mixed media brush from Wow, and it's basically the ink that's in their inking pads, but it has a little brush. So I'm going to use this like a paintbrush, and I'm going to cover up the images and then add the embossing powder. So if you haven't used anything like this, you could use an embossing embossing pen, but it would be a lot of coloring. You get a little bit more coverage, or basically a lot more coverage, if you use this brush, because you've got a thick amount of the ink and you can just paint it on to your image. Now, I'm going to use all of these in the speckled trio, so I wanted to make sure that I did each balloon individually. So that means heat embossing it. So I did the embossing powder and I heat embossed it quickly. And then I'm doing all the blues the same color. We're using speckled egg on the blue and speckled sage on the green. So I am doing these individually. You can try to do like all the greens at one time if you want. That might make it faster. I just was being really careful to make sure that I got it taken care of. I did put powder down and then waited to heat and did a few at a time, and that worked well. Now, sometimes it's hard to see on video all the sparkle, but now this whole panel is done and I can do more to the panel because I've got it heat embossed. So I started with ink blending over the panel. Yes, you could have ink blended prior to this, but I thought it might make my colors a little off. And also, I just, sometimes you're just experimenting and you're not really sure what you want to do. I really like how this turned out with me ink blending over the panel, because once I've done that, if I'd pre-ink blend this, I feel like some of the details for the little strings don't show up as much until you ink blend over that embossed image. And so I feel like it looks better. I did start with a lighter blue, and then I'm going to come in with a darker blue to give this more of that spotlight effect. And oh my goodness, this may be one of my favorite cards I've made. So the first one was stone blue, and now I'm coming in with cove blue. And look at how this starts to look when you're adding that darker color towards the outside edges. It is so beautiful. So with the other card that we're going to make today, we are going to do this in different orders, and I'm going to kind of show you the difference in the card by doing it with different techniques. This one is definitely a dark, bold, kind of moody card. I think it's going to be a great masculine card, and I created those details by doing the ink blending after. Now, all this card needs is I put a little backer on it. I added the happy birthday sentiment, and look at how beautiful that looks. Notice how you can see the strings of the balloons. That's because that ink catches on the embossed area and makes that very visible. So for the second card, we're going to do the ink blending first. I'm going to use two colors of purple and not go into this in super detail, but I'm going to use frosted, which is a really light purple, and then I'm going to come in with a darker purple called serenade, and I'm going to use that around the edges to create that same spotlight effect. All right, and here's how that panel looks at the end. It's a beautiful purple color with a spotlight effect. We're going to take that panel, run it through our embossing folder, and we get those beautiful balloons. And the card looks beautiful like this, but we're going to use Wow embossing powders to really add some amazing detail. So I'm going to use the embossing pen from Wow, and they make these, different companies make them, but this one is really good. I cannot believe that I didn't run out of ink or even get any less ink when I was coloring this whole panel. And it was pretty fast. And this time I didn't take as much care, probably because I was tired from doing the other card, but I forgot to use my anti-static tool before I start embossing this first little part. So it does take a little bit of cleanup. After I embossed the first couple of images though, I went on and did my embossing powder anti-static tool, and it really made a difference. So I'm just adding some color here, and this color is going to be pretty similar to the panel, but each of these candy buffet trios has a beautiful look, and the purple behind it just kind of magnifies its beauty. So if you mess something up, you see I did take the little pen and put some dots on areas if I missed or just had a little bald area in the coloring. And where that embossing powder stuck to the back, I just used a paintbrush that I keep just as my embossing powder brush, and was able to get that off really easily. Like I said, I did use my powder tool after this and didn't have any more trouble with that. So just like with the last panel, I used 2 of the colors on these balloons. To me, it's easier just to break them up in half instead of having all 3. And then I used the 3rd color for something else because we are all about perfectly coordinated cards today. So look at how beautiful those look. You can see some is a little bit darker purple and the other one is not quite. So it gives it a nice variation. So, speaking of perfectly coordinated cards, I did use the lightest color to create the happy. That color has a more white type look, and it is called Fairy Clouds. So I call this using embossing powder to create my own custom cardstock. So I'm just stamping with the embossing pad and getting some ink on this die cut. And then I'm going to use the embossing powder in Fairy Clouds to create a beautiful, sparkly sentiment that just looks like you die cut it out of nice, sparkly paper. Tip on doing this, I tend to hold it in my hand and work on one edge. And then once that edge has been melted and is in place, then I will grab that edge with the tweezers. I usually let it cool just a little bit and then I can use my tweezers. So I'm doing everything that's not touching my hands because this is a hot tool. And like we said, this is going to be a completely coordinated piece of cardstock. So what I'm doing is using my ink pads to create the background. So I'm mounting this piece on a little bit of a mat and I'm using the ink pads to create that. I tried the light color first and I've got to decide if I'm going to use the light or the dark. But most of your ink pads will swipe along there. Catherine Pooler makes it really easy to do this because hers are very juicy. But just think, you don't always have to have the perfect colors that match everything. Just make it match by things you've got in your stash. Let's review what we did. So we ink blended first on this card, and then we used our embossing pen to color in the balloons. I used 2 colors from the Candy Buffet to create the balloons, and then I used the 3rd in the trio to create the sentiment happy. Things that I did to make that card coordinate, I used ink colors for the matting, and I also used it for where it says birthday. I used that same ink color just to bring the whole card together. Notice the strings for the balloons in this one you can see that they're raised, but they don't really show up as much as they do in the other card. And that's because of the techniques that we used in this other card. So look at the strings on this balloon. When we go in and we ink blend later, we're picking up those raised embossed details. So it brings out a little bit more detail. Both cards are beautiful and I love how they turned out, but they are different styles and different ways of doing this that can create different looks. I'll show you some final pictures on this, but notice on the blue card how that difference in coloring makes it look like the balloons are having color or sun hit from one side. I think it looks so cool. This is a flatter look, but still super gorgeous in this purple. And I'm just zooming in so you can see that detail. So think outside the box with these embossing powders. Really think about making some cards that may be different than what you normally do. You can do different techniques with using this. And I hope that you enjoyed this and had a great time during this video. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe. All of the products that I use will be linked in the description. Have a wonderful day. See you soon. Bye.